Good morning. I'm Katherine Londergan. I'm a business designer at IDEO's Boston studio. And when I was invited here today to talk about diversity and how it impacts innovation, I started talking to some colleagues around the office and investigating what this could mean in our business. And initially, I thought I might talk about how our project teams are composed at IDEO because they're multidisciplinary. So I have the pleasure of, at any given moment, working next to former rocket scientists or architects or documentary filmmakers, and we each bring our own points of view to the table. But I thought that more important than who we hire into our business is how we think about our business and how we solve problems. So what are the inputs that are diverse that can help us consider different solutions and different creative approaches? And so since I've been at IDEO over the past 2 years, my inputs have drastically changed. As an innovation and design firm, we focus on what is the unmet consumer need or the latent need that the consumer hasn't even discovered yet. And so in my past jobs, I would focus on things like market research reports or trends over larger segments of people or even benchmarking competition. That doesn't really work in innovation. So now I'm really drawing from individuals, and my inspiration comes from conversations with one human, one individual in their context and in their situations. And this is different because it's a scale of n equals 1, not 2,000 or something statistically significant. And it's a different place to find innovation. And so what I want to share with you today is what that human scale means, how I use it in my work, and a little bit about my journey. And my journey started in the mass market. And my first real job, you guys have probably heard of college students selling knives. I was one of those students. So I sold knives to help pay for school, and it was basically aimed right at the upper middle class, and it was drilled into my head during my training seminar that I was to focus on the 3 M's: married, middle income, and something else very average. So I would pull up to a house, and if there was a minivan, a couple kids running around, and they ate and cut food, I had a pretty good shot at a sale. And so I was aiming for the middle of the bell curve. And I was really just looking at averages and doing the same routine over and over again. I cut a penny with some scissors, I cut a knife, it was kind of, I cut some rope, things like that. And even in my jobs after school, I found myself still designing for and marketing to the mass market, whether it was selling cranberry juice to the average American household or property and casualty insurance to anyone who drove or mutual funds to the mass market. I was aimed at that middle. And it's a great place to build a business if there's something scalable that appeals to a lot of people. But in terms of innovation, it's not the best place to start, and it's honestly oftentimes a dead end. But we're a product of our process, and what I knew of innovation in the beginning of my career was that the process wasn't really designed to accept diverse inputs, and especially along the way to keep accepting those, or to create diverse solutions. And it felt like a lot of committees. It felt really slow to me and kind of frustrating at times, and it felt like it was narrowing and filtering and going after statistical significance on which we could build forecasts. And as a result, sometimes we ended up with products that were either a little watered down or just felt very safe or built on lowest common denominators. And here's an exhibit A, the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter. So I read about this recently, and it's cheap to take a shot at the government right now. But this fighter jet was designed by many different committees, different branches of the military, and the process and the committees were really the boss instead of the user and the situation he or she might find himself in. And so it's actually failing in a lot of the simulations, being shot down. And so in tests, experts are saying that it can't turn, it can't climb, and it can't run. I would imagine that these are pretty serious issues for a fighter pilot. So this is an extreme example, but what I'm trying to highlight here is that, again, the committees and the process was the boss, not the user and the user's situation. And in my transition from a business manager to now a designer working at IDEO, that's one of the biggest shifts I've had to be disciplined in staying close to what is the user, what are they going through, and what's the situation they're in. And so design thinking sees the world in 3 different spaces. The first is desirability. So for a human, what is the widget that they need to have? Is it pink? Where does it live in their house? How do they want it to feel in their hand? What value does it create? The second one is feasibility, and this is technically how do we build the widget? What flashing lights and buttons does it need? What technology is inside? And the third is viability, or the business requirements. And this is where most of my focus is. But what are people willing to pay for this thing? Where are they going to find it in the marketplace? And what else does it add to our business besides just another product in the portfolio? And in the mass market, many businesses focus on feasibility and viability. So what are we capable of producing? How much can we produce? And what kind of margin can we make on it? That kind of mentality. But in design, we start with the humans and what their needs are, really understanding and meeting them where they are in their lives. And so when I say design, it's not about aesthetics, although aesthetics are an important part of desirability. It's more about human-centered problem solving. So what is their need and how do we design around that? And humans aren't demographics. They aren't the trends that I was reading about in market research. They are needs and desires and beliefs. They are some of their unique experiences, just like all of us in this room, and they are fascinating. And so their stories, and the stories that I've been able to hear at the human scale, have been a true inspiration to me. Sally was a woman, we're just going to make up names. Sally was a woman who I met recently, and she was a firecracker. She has a different color on each of her fingernails, and she has a lot of different diseases, and we were there to talk to her about medication. And I presented her a few prototypes that would help her take her pills out into the world in a bit more of a discreet manner, give her a bit more privacy around it, and she just frowned at me and brought out this pill box with all these flowers on it. Sally doesn't see pills as something embarrassing or something she has to be apologetic for. She saw it as another opportunity to bring her personality to life and her style. And she looked for this pill box for 3 months. Next is Raphael, who we met. Raphael is a diabetic who lives in Atlanta, and that tattoo is his wife, who passed away pretty recently. This was a very tough interview. He talked about his depression and how it really held him back from getting real treatment for his diabetes and his heart disease. So even though he knew what he had to do to manage his diseases, he was just so emotionally stuck. And that was a pretty big insight for us. And then there was Steve, who actually a few of the people in this room met. Steve lives in LA. He said he was 39, but we all thought he was about 25. He just looked amazing. He was a big dreamer, a hopeless romantic, and we were there talking to him about financial services and things like saving for an emergency fund. And he wanted to talk about his 2013 priorities, which were finding a man that could financially support him. So, as you can see, very colorful stories and a lot of rich inputs to the design process. So we're not really getting, we're going deep with these people, and as you can probably tell, I remember these people and I really feel their stories, which helps me bring it back over and over again in the design process. So when everyone's aiming for the middle, if we think about a lot of our competitors, we're going to be getting the same inputs. So going deeper and getting to that human scale really helps us diversify the inputs. Let's take an example of marketing something, a financial product, to the mass affluent. We could do a survey of 2,000 American households that represent the average, and we could screen out everyone who doesn't fit that average. But we probably won't find anything too surprising. Instead, what if we looked at the extremes and we talked to some diverse users? Maybe a poor family that's kind of struggling, or maybe someone who inherited a lot of money, or even is a self-made millionaire. And we really try to pick apart their mental models, their behaviors, and their attitudes around money. Maybe that would give us something a little bit different that we could use as a diverse input into the design process. And a lot of times I'll put these research plans in front of clients and they say, Katherine, that's not our target market. And I realize that, but I'm not trying to sell to these people in these moments. I'm trying to understand if they look at things a different way that might be fuel for a new hypothesis, a new prototype, or just even a new question we can start asking. And here's an example of an extreme user that helped fuel a new design. Anyone here heard of Keep the Change from Bank of America? or maybe you own the account. So Keep the Change came from a low-income mom who used to round up her utility bills because she wanted to have more than enough, and she wanted to have a little credit with the energy company because it felt like a savings account. And so what happened with Keep the Change is the debit card rounds up your transactions to the next dollar, dumps it in your savings account automatically, and boom. What's interesting about this is that it's judo. It's not forcing new behaviors. It's taking something people already think about and just building on it and going with it. So it became a prototype, it was iterated on, and now it helped Bank of America get 2.5 million new customers over a fairly short period of time. Another example is with Shimano and bicycle opportunities. So we talked to some older people that wanted to feel what it was like to ride a bike like a kid again, which is probably something we can all relate to. If you walk into a bike shop nowadays, it's so complicated. There are way too many options, way too many mechanisms. What does that gear do? How much does that thing cost? They just wanted to feel like a kid again, an easy, joyful ride. And so the IDEO team and the Shimano team built these coaster bikes and started a campaign called Coasting. And now you see these popping up all over the place because they're accessible and it's fun, and that's what it should be. So as you can see, these extreme users and the human scale can really influence our innovations and what we're designing. But also, the outside world, not just innovation firms, is really embracing the human scale. And we have tools and platforms popping up all over the place as evidence of this. One is that individuals can now be manufacturers on sites like Shapeways. So with the help of a 3D printer, you're now a maker. Or on Kickstarter, where any human can be a VC to another human. Or even Etsy, where two humans can meet and one can actually co-create the product that they pay in advance for, which is awesome. And the maker individual can then make it and fulfill the order. So it's happening out there in the world. But what I want to share with as the last part of my talk today is 3 different ways that we can embrace the human scale. And these are things that I try to use in my daily life on my journey as a designer from mass market land to the human scale. The first one is the most important if it's the only thing you remember from my talk today. And this is empathy exercises. Whenever I'm stuck, I just get proximity to the user. I just try to get into their situation. And this is an example of an IDEOer who checked himself into an ER of a hospital. The hospital was the client, and had a video camera and basically just recorded the entire experience from the patient perspective. So not only did it help him, but it helped the hospital's board understand the experience when they were seeing fluorescent lights and ceiling tiles and hearing 2 nurses talking about the guy as if he wasn't even in the room. Another one is learning from extremes. So this was the extreme users I talked about. A project that we did for Ford on a car's interface, the user interface, was inspired by learning from airline pilots, firefighters, and police officers who have to navigate really complex information systems under a lot of stress and in transit. So ideas from those conversations informed designs and prototypes and iterations. And last, tangible experiments. So making things physical is much more useful to get user reactions at that human scale. And this is an example of a prototype that explored what the future of a vending machine might look like. So you can imagine on top, there's kind of a friendly face of a video, senses that you're walking by, invites you over to make a couple of choices. And you can see that describing this to someone might fall flat, but in building it, we can do a couple of things. We can get her reactions at a much more visceral level. And if it triggers a new idea, we can actually draw it and implement it right away. The other thing it does, because it's physical and analog, is it allows us to invest very little time, energy, or emotional commitment in the idea, so we can test a ton of solutions at once and just keep iterating and iterating. So I encourage you all to make and draw. This is one of my biggest transitions from spreadsheets and PowerPoints to IDEO. So making a thing. And so those are 3 ways that I try to stay close to that human scale. Hopefully, at least one of them helps you in your work. And I think that you'll find it's a lot more invigorating and inspiring and fascinating to work at the human scale, but it also helps us invent and and design things that are much more impactful and differentiating for the businesses we work in. So thank you, humans.